is about. Any questions or comments about that? Any thoughts? Does that make any sense? That may be unrealistic, given your existing relationships. But you have to visualize first before you activate a game plan. I want you to start visualizing that. EAP is genuine advocates for early and effective interventions dealing with the aging maze. You are well poised. That can be a business model and should be. Hand in glove with the insurance carrier and hand in hand with the HR department. They need and want help dealing with this. This is an area where great return on investment for proactivity, but we know it's hard. Look at our own lives. When was the last time you all did legacy planning in your own family? Yeah.
I think it's so easy for us too, because we deal with this stuff every day. But employers, supervisors, managers, I truly believe they just don't know how to address, they just don't know how to.
It's easy for you as a therapist to deal with these issues versus the employers?
And think that it's such common sense, and that, you know, why wouldn't people be asking these questions or talking about it? But it's been my experience that the average person, they don't deal with this stuff every day. It's not common sense to them, and they do need education around how to have the conversation.
Did you hear that comment? You know, yeah, collectively in group. We're therapists. We're well educated. We've dealt on multiple levels with life's challenges, of which aging is obviously one. Let me throw out some ideas. And this is as much marketing as it is risk management as it is legal. And it may seem crazy, but I don't think it's so crazy. I have some articles to prove it. You do this all the time. Isn't a hallmark of therapeutic approach reframing? Mm-hmm. Why not reframe aging issues? I'm not talking about the happy aging issues that you see in the Wall Street Journal of people driving down beautiful golf courses. I'm talking about the stuff of real conflict and dilemma. I'm saying reframe it. One of the tables I was at, the life experience of being at a funeral at a younger person was an epiphany and affirmation of life. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that what it should be? How do we take that anecdotal experience from our lives, that philosophy that we know sounds great when Irving Yalom says it or we read it in some self-help book, how do we transport it from there to real life, to being a persuasive argument of advocacy in the workplace? That's, I think, one of our big challenges, to get utilization up. And I think what you have to do is some degree of reframing. Here are some ideas. Much less stress when you've solved the problem or at least have an action plan than none at all. When you wake up in the middle of the night and you take out a pad of paper for issue X and you jot down a few ideas and go back to sleep, don't you feel better? That's incredibly simplistic, but I think it's a fundamental truth. Any problem you or your clientele are wrestling with is less stressful if you're dealing with it, if you're moving forward, if you're action planning it. So that's a core concept that a mid-level manager could understand. That's what you sell. EAP is about problem solving. Removing impediments to productivity in the workplace. We're your partner to make more money. You got to throw money into the conversation. Who are we kidding? But it's true. Okay, let's talk about the pink elephant in the room called the age wave. We got to deal with it. We can't ignore it. It's going to be 3 times as bad in 15 years. Okay? Here's an action plan of how our interventions can return investment in this arena. You should fund it, because here's what the ROI is going to be. Let's just take one anecdote, and all of you have countless anecdotes of what would happen to client X if he just kept it all inside, didn't deal with an aging parent issue or a caregiving issue, versus the happy ending story where he did come for help and you did get him to good resources and he stayed an award-winning employee. You need to pull together those anecdotes and you gotta sell that to upper level management. And obviously you need to get HR embedded in that, etc. And you need to ideally get their insurance company who writes their policy lines. What's the source of all claims risk across all the spectrum? Products liability, commercial general liability, employment practices liability. It's a human factor. Unless you have a company of robots building robots, the human factor is always going to be the primary source of claim liability. Well, that's music to the ears of the claims adjuster. So you reframe this as a risk management issue, as a claims reduction issue, as a profitability, productivity issue. And how do you get people talking about death? Put on your marketing hat. There's a recent article out of the Denver Post. Funeral planning is no laughing matter unless. It's an article about how to inject, yes, some levity. And a lot of stressful things in life. You have to make a decision. Are we going to laugh about it or cry about it? Get creative. They're doing it with funeral planning. There's an article out of the Wall Street Journal. Life Lessons from Death 101. College death classes. Learning how to frankly talk about death. Isn't that cool? Would I have the courage to go? I'm not so sure, but I think it's cool. There was a recent article I read about, I kid you not, wine and death cocktail parties, people hosting in their house. But you think about it, why are we doing it? Go back to Brené Brown, who we were talking about last month. What is the core of human existence? Our need and desire for connectivity, especially when dealing with stressful issues. So if having wine and chocolate and saying, I'm 40 and I'm wrestling with an aging parent. I want to have a group get together, you know, at work or somewhere else. Let's just acknowledge this is tough stuff, but that we're not alone. And build a class around it, build a gathering around it, and why shouldn't the advocate or impetus be you as EAP providers?
There was a wonderful speaker here about a year and a half ago on hospice care. And she's having coffee house get-togethers about death on a regular basis in town in Denver.
Did you hear that? Get-togethers by hospice. I love hospice. For many years, I represented the Denver Hospice Fund, Hospice of Metro Denver, Bev Sloan, and Janelle McCallum very well. That's, to me, God's work. But that is a resource for you. And there are so many myths surrounding hospice, that hospice means giving up, which is not true, that hospice, gee, something's wrong if you don't die in hospice, the issues of graduation. In fact, I wrote an article for the HuffPost recently on hospice issues. It's a big issue right now. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but it's a huge issue in terms of options for people, because the feds, because of fraud, are cracking down. But you know what happens with government. So there's a problem, they don't look deeply at it, they just exert more pressure, and they apply often a broad brush. So there's more and more pressure on good providers, nonprofit providers, to jump through more hoops that are unnecessary and add to their costs. And I think risk our future options to utilize hospice, and fewer options as to which hospice. But yes, hospice and death and dying can be made into educational opportunities that get people talking. And it needs to be moved upstream. Pam, I'm sure you have a...
Yeah, I want to
I'm
say
sure you're
something
dying to say
support
something.
what he's saying.
No pun intended.
So, when I was 35, my mom died, okay? And I had a really great supervisor. I was working for Memorex at the time, and he arranged me to take a sales trip to go back, and he's like, stay a week, do the funeral, whatever. 3 years later, when my dad died, I was working for Best Foods and Unilever, and so my dad died September 30th, my brother died 6 months later, and I had a boss who was like totally insensitive. She was like pushing me for performance and all this kind of stuff. I know we had an EAP. I could tell you, it was never offered to me at all. So I had like a great boss who had life experience in it, and this other woman who I will remember till the day I die, who was horrible. If I had known like that support was available, I would have certainly gone to get it. And I know we had an EAP. I mean, Best Foods Unilever, for God's sakes, but nobody ever mentioned it to me, ever. And I think if there was awareness to employees that it existed, I think people would go. But I don't know that there is. You guys would know more than I would.
It's a huge challenge. I think one of the ways we need to do this is collectively try and get to senior management, whether it's through their insurance carriers. I'll share with you right now, I'm beating my head against the wall. I'm trying to embed my services within insurance brokerage firms, insurance carriers. And it's like I'm talking physics and quantum theory to these people. With all due respect to me, it's so self-evident that these issues are risk management issues. They are productivity issues. And why would you not want to, build it into your costs of insurance, because it's a form of claims management, keeping me out of the courtroom for you. I'm going, yeah, like that guy in the picture, I'm going, oy vey. I'm explaining it and eyes are rolling back in my head. Oh my gosh, did you not read the most recent Gallup study? Can you not relate to these caregiving challenges? Do you not see how it's draining loyalty? You complain you don't have competitive advantage and you're looking for the next great competitive advantage, the new widget, or, well, in a lot of industries, there is no widget to be had. If you're a top service company, everyone does the same thing. Hard to change products, on a dime. If you're the top tier law firm or accounting firm or consulting firm, what do you have to sell but what the other guy's selling too? Expertise, but your staff's important. It's your brain power. You see a lot of talk about it in the Silicon Valley, but that's an issue everywhere. You need to worker loyalty. Do you really think any of us care more about a concierge service of our dry cleaning being done for us so we could focus on our 60th hour in the office versus them meaningfully helping us with a dying mother? If you do one and neglect the other, what do you think at the end of the day is the net result in the mindset of your employee that you're trying to breed loyalty with? I think we got to start talking more about this and how we position your industry to step into that breach. And it's a huge breach, but I think also a huge opportunity. Why do I throw in succession planning? I just want to share this for a second. The fear of death and dying is so universal that one of the other stark statistics is that highly affluent multi-generational families that have closely held businesses, and most of them do, have a 50% rate of no succession plan in place. Wow is right. What does that tell me? I just go, wait a second. They can afford a consultant. They sure as heck know where to find a consultant to do a business succession plan. What's missing? I personally think the affluent are just as frightened of death and dying and into denial about it as you and I. Now, you may not have a lot of empathy with people wrestling with, should I buy a jet or fractional ownership or whatever, but to me it shows the commonality of all of us. We all wrestle with this. And so that's a huge untapped market, and it's also a sad commentary. Businesses dry up, wither, and die because their affluent founders don't want to deal with succession, because it means, guess what, they're mortal. Could also be the firstborn child's a village idiot, but you still got to deal with it. And employees lose jobs, small towns dry up and blow away. And that's huge. So this is a societal issue that affects us all. We don't have time to do this exercise, and I sort of took you there in terms of visualization already. And wow, the new definition of home. And jump in whenever you want. Disagree whenever you want. Your ideas are as valid as mine, but I wanted to get our dialogue going. we have understandable myths about what home means. And it's from a variety of sources. You know, how we were raised. There's some uniqueness about America and this single-family home, and just being at home. And I'm not criticizing it. I believe it is good. But for our parents or people getting 70 plus, although the average age in assisted living is around 83 because of healthcare and our longevity, so the numbers have moved up. But I would share with you my perspective is home is wonderful, and I believe in the philosophy that if you can empower seniors to stay in their home as long as it's prudent, the word for me is prudent, again, an individual decision, that's terrific. When it stops becoming prudent and starts bordering on endangering, it's time to revisit the myth that aging in place, this concept we hear about, and is actually defined to relate to the family home as opposed to be in assisted living or in a care facility, I think is part of the myth. I think it's perpetuated by AERP. Many institutions I admire, respect, work with, but what we do is I think we hamper our visioning. We hamper the options we explore either in our own lives or for others. When we think of home as just being one finite place as opposed to a portable concept. And it's been a long time in the making. And what I have personally witnessed, and it was one of the most frustrating aspects of being an executive director of a retirement community, is the people who I knew would thrive in my particular community and wanted to do this and put it off and latched onto the notion that I'm home, therefore I'm independent. Well, being independent is a verb. If you're mismanaging your meds, if you're depressed, if you're lonely, if you're not eating because you don't have company, in my book, that's not truly independent living. And so our challenge is to educate society about the growing options. Assisted living has evolved during the course of my professional career. And it's a very viable option. May not be the best option for everyone, but we owe it to ourselves to explore the continuum. There are other complicating factors about how we define home anymore. We now have millennial generation, kids who 18 to 30 never leave the home or boomerang back after college because they can't get a job. We have blended families. We have 50% divorce rate. We have societal pressures. So the whole issue of what is home and what's the extended family has gotten that much more complex. The days of Ozzie and Harriet are long gone. And so rather than grieve that fact, I'm saying we should embrace the notion that there are more options. It's kind of like the book Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. Define home more broadly, and therefore it becomes a more viable option. But how would that be feasible to a senior if the family's never taken her to a modern day assisted living or a continuing care retirement community, or we've never been to one? As therapists, if you're dealing with these issues, you need to get out into the community. You need to interview people like Pam and say, what kind of role do you play as a geriatric care manager? Earlier in my legal career as a healthcare attorney, the concept of a geriatric care manager was virtually unknown. People didn't know how or when to utilize them as advocates, as game planners. And in fact, many people think to use a geriatric care manager like Pam only pre-plan before moving into a facility. As both an attorney and executive director, I've used them as advocates when the care was disappointing or challenging, even after they were in a facility. You have to, not all doctors are great geriatricians, and certainly not trained as gerontologists. And pain management, psychiatric issues are huge in long-term care. And so that's just one snippet of advice about how to use